the question is, what are the common issues that you see in a methodology chapter that'll lead to it getting failed or passed along? So what
Mm.
are the issues that commonly hold students back, Matthew?
Yeah, this is a great question to start with because we're going to hit on a idea that I'm probably going to cover couple of times over the next hour, which is detail. Detail, detail, detail. The number one reason that I see that my grad coach clients have trouble getting it through is when they lack sufficient detail. Your methodology should be written in such a level of detail that anyone can pick it up and duplicate your study the way you intended for it to be run, even if they have no idea or no prior background or experience in your field. This is a higher level of detail, a higher threshold than what you're going to find in journal articles, because in journal articles, we're looking for quick summaries of methodologies. But in a dissertation, where this is really an assessment of your skills and knowledge, we're looking for deep, deep detail, deep understanding of that method that you have chosen. I would say the other big challenge that a lot of my clients have is not rooting their methodology back into their literature review. And so for your dissertation, you should not be creating new methodologies. You should not be creating new applications of existing methodologies unless you can tie those back to prior theories, prior connections, prior applications. We're not looking here for this magnum opus industry changing work in your dissertation. What we're looking is that you as a professional are able to take what is already existing in the field and apply it in a high level of rigor.
I think those are really good points. That detail is so important. I also like to say that justification is super important as well. And there's a few ways that you can justify that, but really you want to make sure you've got literature basis, as Matthew mentioned, but also that you've got a clear link back to your research question, because that can be a bit of an issue for a methodology chapter as well. So the next question is specifically about a framework, which is Saunders Research Onion. The question is, could you give some advice on how to approach the Saunders Research Onion and writing about those elements in your methods chapter? Matthew, what is Saunders Research Onion and why do we care?
Yeah, great question. So, Saunders Research Onion is a framework that helps you to really think through all of the pieces and the elements of your methodology. Not necessarily your methodology chapter, but your methodology itself, how we're going to build our methodology. If you're not familiar, a quick Google search of Saunders Research Onion will pop up tons of resources. We have one also at Grad Coach. You can take a look at that. Basically, when we think about this, it's often shown in a diagram with stacked circles. And we kind of work from the outside in. So we start at the big picture and we think about what is our research philosophy? What is our big paradigm that we're going to apply to this? Is it interpretivism? Is it positivism? Is it pragmatism? What kind of epistemological view are we taking in our dissertation? Then we come a step in and we think about our research approach. Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? And we kind of shift into those buckets at this point. We go in another level, we start thinking about our research strategy. Is it experimental? Are we using action research techniques? Maybe we're doing case studies. Maybe we're doing qualitative interviewing. We start to get into our strategies of specific things we're going to do. We get in smaller. Now we get into our choices. We start really to refine and define what this study is going to look like. A next circle down, time horizon. We start to think about what are our time boundaries? When are we going to roll this out? When are we starting data collection? When are we finishing data collection? What does our window look like? And then we get into that real nitty gritty at the middle of our concentric circles, which is techniques and procedures, specifically and in detail. What are we going to do? And so I said at the beginning of this question that this is a framework for defining our methodology, but not necessarily our chapter. And that's because our chapter is going to unfold a little bit differently than this methodological procedure. So working through the Saunders Research Onion is really more of an exercise that you should do early in your dissertation process that you should be talking about with your advisor. This is a great place where your advisor can give feedback, where your advisor can sort of catch you and redirect you if you're going in a way that they don't want you to go before you do all of the writing. And then when we shift over to actually writing that methodology chapter, we're going to take these pieces from our exercise and we're going to plug them into the various sections of our chapter, usually following the template provided by our university, which is going to be a little bit different. It's going to give you some different places to talk about data collection and samples and procedures in a different kind of way and structure. So think about the research onion first as an exercise, as a sort of calibration and preparation exercise. And then we want to turn to our dissertation handbook and really begin writing our methodology through the lens provided to us in that handbook.
So I've just popped up a link there to a blog post that we have, Saunders Research Onion. So we cover that in a little bit more detail there. But as Matthew said, it's really a framework to think about how to design and how to develop your research methodology. You're not necessarily going to follow that structure in your methods chapter. That's going to really depend on the institution and the requirements and expectations. As I always say, take a look at previous examples of dissertations from your department, if you can get access to them, because that's going to be sort of your gold standard for what are the norms. And if you're struggling to get hold of them, maybe ask your supervisor, do they have a past student's proposal or methodology chapter that they can share with you as well? Because that's also going to give you the inside scoop on how they like to structure the methods chapter. But yes, definitely Saunders is great for helping you think through those big decisions that you need to make at each stage of the research methodology. So the next question we have is, what are some key techniques I can use for choosing the right research methodology for my study?
Yeah, a great question because there are so many methodologies to choose from. And, these methodologies, they become our roadmap for the rest of our dissertation. So making that right choice up front and early really is key to success. So a couple of thoughts on this. First, we have to start with our research question. And your methodology obviously has to answer your research question. And so making sure that there's alignment there is really important. So if you're doing more of a descriptive kind of question, like what's happening in this circumstance, then that's going to drive you towards more qualitative work where we're trying to understand the impact of a phenomena on a group of people. Or maybe you're doing some comparative analysis. You're implementing an intervention in a classroom and you're trying to compare this classroom to that classroom or this school system to that school system. That's going to take you more towards that experimental, maybe quasi-experimental design area. So we want to start with our question and make sure that there's alignment between our methodology and our question. Your question should knock a lot of methodologies off the list pretty quick. We then want to kind of think about what can we feasibly do? And this is one that a lot of us, I think, get to too late in the process because, a lot of us have this idea that our dissertation is the most important piece of research and writing we will ever do in our lives. And we build it up really big in our head. But really, that's kind of a toxic framing for a lot of us because it's really the first big piece of research that most of us will do. And so it's not going to be this grand magnum opus that changes the world. We want to think about what can we actually accomplish? What data do you have access to? What techniques do you have access to? What tools? What have you learned in your methodology classes? So this is not a space to test out new methodologies that you've never heard of before. Go back through your methodology classes, through the notes that you've taken, through the textbooks that you have, and select a methodology from there that you are well trained in, well structured, and prepared to address. A lot of clients come to us at Grad Coach because they've chosen a methodology that they don't know how to do, and they need us to help teach them and work through the steps of those methodologies. So think about what can you actually do. And then finally, I would also say, consider your time frame. Most of the folks who work with us at Grad Coach are part-time graduate students. They're working adults, they have families, they have jobs, they have churches, they have social clubs, they have commitments, many commitments, and they're doing this on top of all of that. And so think about When do you want to be finished? If you want to be finished in 6 months, then you can't pick a methodology that takes 3 years to complete. And so we have to think about the practical confinement of your situation and make sure that your methodology fits within those confines. David, what do you think?
Those are really great points. Alignment is always the most important. It doesn't help doing a methodology that's going to not answer your question. And then, as Matthew said at the end there, really think about what's feasible. I've had many situations working with clients where they have a grand idea. They have a really exciting topic. They have a really niche idea, but they don't have access to, for instance, CEOs in Fortune 500 companies. And so as a result, they end up getting stuck. So then you've got to think, what can I do to answer that question with an approach that'll work for my timeline, for my skill set, and for my experience as well. So definitely always think about what can I do, what is going to be feasible, and what will help me get my dissertation done as opposed to getting me ABD. So we're going to take another pre-submitted question, and this is about justifying your methodology. So Matthew, how do I justify my chosen method without listing and explaining every other methodology?
Yeah, this is a great question. So, usually in the justification, we're looking to see two things. We're looking to see that the methodology that you've chosen is appropriate for what you're trying to do and has been done before, right? So we're looking for sources and citations that say, I'm going to use this technique with this population to answer this question. And here's 4 or 5 other people who have used this technique to answer a similar question in a similar population. That's one way that you're really going to justify your work and being able to say, like, look, this isn't something that I just came up with. This is a valid and standard method of assessing this kind of question. Can you create a new methodology in your dissertation? Probably. But do you have time and capacity to do that as a working adult with a family and other commitments? Probably not. So, pulling from those other studies helps to really justify your work. Also helps to inspire and guide your work because when you get stuck, you can go back to those studies and see kind of what they did. It gives you some procedural support. The other thing that we're looking for is that you have intentionally rejected some other common study methods for your question. And so as you're going through the literature and you're looking for those samples that might align to what you're trying to do, flag a couple that use a different methodology to answer a similar question. Just a couple. I don't think that you need a lot. And you're going to include a couple paragraphs in your chapter that says, I also considered this study design and it was used by this person. So we're going to acknowledge that it has been used, but we chose not to use it because X, Y, and Z, because of time, because of limitations on data, because of whatever reasons that there might be. So I think those are the two elements. First, we're finding existing methodology in the literature, and we're using that to justify why we chose it. As we're finding, we're also flagging other methods that we're not going to choose. And we're going to briefly discuss 2 or 3 others and why we did not choose them. Citations, citations, citations. A lot of times people think by the time they get to that methodology chapter, they're done, that all my citations live in my literature review. They go here too. So make sure that this conversation, this part of your methodology chapter is heavily cited because that's where we're looking for proof that this methodology is going to work.
I think that's exactly right. Looking at those two ideas, what is going to work, what am I planning to do, supporting with relevant literature, and what's not going to work. And a little bit of advice if you're struggling to decide how do I choose how many other options to work with, think about your research question and which direction it leads, and then sort of do a high level. We're pursuing this qualitatively, so we're not going to be using any quantitative methodologies like John et al. And you could cite a few people. And that way you can cut out a huge chunk without too much justification and detail. And then you can close in on your specific research stream, whether it's qualitative or quantitative or mixed methods, and then talk about the smaller, more detailed approaches and why they're not relevant to addressing your question. But think about how you can sort of bucket things if you can, and then split out that way so that you can cut out quite a large number in a single paragraph if you're worried about word count, which I'm reading between the lines is the case here. So then we have another pre-submitted question. What practical details about interviews and interview protocols are examiners looking for? And what do I include in my methods chapter about my interviews?
Yeah. So here again, detail, detail, detail. Your examiner wants to know who you're interviewing, why you selected them. They want to know the context in which the interview is being done. Is that interview being done in person? Is it being done through a virtual platform? And I would even go as far as to say, name the virtual platform. Is it Teams? Is it Zoom? Is it whatever, FaceTime or whatever it is? Maybe it's on the telephone. So being very specific in that way, thinking about your protocol. So, are you entering into the interview with a sort of introduction where you re explain, where you solicit verbal approval to continue with the interview, verbal consent to continue? Is it structured or semi structured? Are you sticking to your list of 10 questions, or might you ask follow up questions? Give us some examples of what kinds of follow up questions you might ask and when you might ask a follow up question. And then you should also include the list of your questions, but that really should be, I think, an appendix at the end, not necessarily in the text of your methodology. So your examiners will want to see your questions. I always tell people to script the whole interview. So when I'm coaching folks, I always say script your whole introduction, ask for verbal consent, and then script your exit. What are you going to say to them? How are you going to say thank you before you click off? The last thing I would include here is, how are you going to record that interview? How are you going to transcribe that interview so that you can analyze it? And then how are you going to store all of that so that it is safe and secure? I always suggest recording every interview, even if it is in person, even if it is a phone call, where maybe recording takes a little, a couple extra steps than like on a Zoom or a Teams meeting where you just hit a button, right? But you want to do that so that you can go back and make sure that you're getting those exact perfect quotes so you can put those quotes into your final dissertation.
I think that's really great advice. I was waiting to see if Matthew was going to mention the interview guide, but that's exactly what you want to do. Having that clear structure of how you're going to tackle it is going to be great. And you don't even have to go into too much detail in the methodology chapter itself. You can just refer to the appendix and where that is. And then the other thing is just some practicalities as well. How long is your interview going to be? How are you accessing the people for your interviews? There's a lot of those little practical steps. And the best bit of advice I can give here is take a look at dissertations again, because as Matthew mentioned right at the start of the session today, journal articles don't necessarily always provide the level of detail that's expected in a dissertation. So take a look at a PhD or a master's degree dissertation from your institute, or even if you can't access your institutes, look in your field of study, because there are often norms and expectations. I did a science degree. We had a very different methodology chapter to a social sciences based project. And so there are those norms and expectations that do differ between fields. So always go back and check those to see if you can find out what's a good gold standard that I can follow and just adjust to my context as well. We have another question, and this is a common one that we find in Grad Coach. What are the pitfalls of conducting a mixed methods study, Matthew, and how do we avoid them?
Yeah, so I'm just going to be real frank. Usually, with my clients at Grad Coach, I discourage mixed methods approaches in the dissertation for a couple of reasons. The first is really because of the time and the resources needed to do these kinds of studies well. You have to have a lot of time, a lot of resources to pull all of the pieces together. And so I usually discourage that and tell people to pick one or the other, because my motto is the best dissertation is a finished dissertation. And we want to get you across that finish line. So a couple of things that can make this really hard. First, is really the convergence of the two methods. You have to make sure that everything is very complementary, that they're working together, and that one method isn't in the way or influencing another part of the method. So, this can be really tricky. For example, if we are, say, doing some kind of quantitative surveying, and then we are also following up with an interview. That interview, if not done correctly and sequentially, could influence that quantitative survey. And you could influence how people are responding to that survey if you don't get the sequence just right. And that's tricky with respondents because it's hard to know for sure who's done what they're supposed to do and did they do things in the right order. Sometimes, we might use like a document review process. Are we accessing the right documents? Are we really getting a full corpus of necessary documents to align to whatever quantitative analysis that it is that we're doing? So that can be really tricky. You also have to have two of everything, two instruments, two sampling strategies, two recruitment processes, two analysis processes. And so basically, you're writing two dissertations. So instead of 150 pages, you're writing 300 or more pages. So that's another reason why I tend to discourage this because it's just the volume of work. Another challenge is IRB approval. IRB is, I think, for most people, the most frustrating part of the process because you submit your form, you have to wait for IRB to come in and have a meeting, review your form. They almost always reject it the first time, just kind of as a rule in my experience. So you make edits and you have to wait for the next IRB. Some smaller universities, their IRB might only meet 6 times a year. And so you're waiting all the time. And so the more methods we have to get our IRB to approve, the more times we're waiting, the longer our dissertation is going to take. The other part of this I think is really hard is the justification. Why do you need both sets of methodologies to answer your question? One of the things I tell people is that once you are a doctor, you can do whatever study that you want to do. And in fact, most of us will go into jobs where we are required to keep doing studies. And so we don't have to answer all of the questions right now. We don't have to bring forward a multi-pronged research question that takes all of these different layers and methodologies at once. We can home in, we can pick one and be very specific, get a successful dissertation, and then spend the rest of our career studying those other questions, deploying those other methodologies. I could probably go on, but I think I've made it pretty clear that I don't love a mixed method dissertation and that it really creates a lot of extra burden and a lot of extra challenge and time for you as a student.
I think you've raised excellent points there, Matthew. It really is making extra work for yourself. That said, there are cases where a mixed method is needed. And when that does happen, then you've got to be aware of those pitfalls. And as Matthew said, it's time, it's the way that they integrate. How do you triangulate those data? So how do you find the one result set from your quantitative and your qualitative? How do you marry those together in your results and discussion? Too often, I've seen clients with a mixed method approach where it feels like it's two separate subtopics sort of squished together. And that's really going to undermine the quality of your research. So always think about that question at the beginning or when you're thinking about mixed methods is, do I need a mixed methods? Is that the only way? Or can I really do a very clean quantitative or qualitative approach and then talk about how I can apply that other side, the qualitative side or the quantitative side in future research as well? That's a great way of also showing to your panel that you are thinking critically about the results and the way to proceed with your research, which is something they're always looking for as well.
While you logged off, there was one other question in the
Go for
chat that
it.
I was going to pull. And this question was about AI and how and when to use AI as part of our methodology work or about really any part of our dissertation. So, if that's okay, David, let's talk about that briefly as we kind of wrap up here, because this is probably the number one question that I get from every client, existing clients who are just discovering AI, and also new clients who are bringing that to the table when they first meet with me at Grad Coach. So, we know we're living in an era of constant generative AI where we have so many options to create text and to pull things. But we also know that that AI work is not up to snuff yet, that AI hallucinates, that it makes up answers, and that it can be really problematic. So when you're using AI tools, I'm not going to tell you not to use them because I think that's just unrealistic. But here's what I want you to think about when you are using them. Use AI tools that help facilitate your process, not tools that produce your product. Okay, that to me is the barrier that we want to think about in AI. So tools like Elicit, like Consensus AI, like Research Rabbit. These tools use artificial intelligence to skim papers, to help connect papers together, to help you find relevant papers faster, so that instead of reading 50 papers to find the 10 best ones, you're maybe reading 15 to find the 10 best ones because they're all pretty close. I think that that is a good use of AI to facilitate your process, but not your product, because you still have to read, you still have to synthesize, you still have to make those intellectual decisions. Here's where I do not want you to use AI. I do not want you to use AI to write your chapter. I do not want you to use AI to re-paraphrase a paragraph because AI has a tone. And sometimes it makes my clients a little upset, but I can spot it every time. I know when you've done it because they sound the same and it suddenly doesn't sound like you. And so I've read chapters 1 and 2, and now we're in your methodology, and all of a sudden this new author is talking to me. And that's when that AI comes into play. It's not that the AI text is bad, it's that the tone changes, the timbre changes, the vocabulary changes, and it's very obvious. Universities are also using AI checkers, and they are wildly inaccurate. And so you have to really protect yourself against those AI trackers because you're probably going to get tagged for AI use even if you haven't used any. And so if you are using it, then you're going to get tagged for even more AI use. Another thing I would say if you're worried about AI trackers is avoid the M dash. Which is one of my favorite punctuation marks. I've used it for years. They're all over my dissertation, which was written way before AI. But AI loves an M dash too. And so I can't use them anymore because everyone assumes that that is an AI thing. So be very cautious. Remember that AI should be for your process, not your product.
I think that's the best way to summarize it. Process, not product. So think about if you want to use it to help your writing, use it to help you think out your outline, to develop your flow of ideas. Do not use it to write those paragraphs. As Matthew said, it's something that is becoming a huge issue in academia as well. There is an arms race between AI tool generation and AI trackers. And just a word of advice as well, if you're using Grammarly or Grammarly Plus, that also can get flagged as an AI tool. So just be very careful when you're doing that. What I can suggest is really beneficial is to get hand editing done. So your university might have an editing team. Grad Coach also offers editing as well, but hand done editing is going to help ensure that your tone, your structure, the vocabulary that you use is consistent and not consistently AI either. But I think that's all the time that we have at the moment. I want to say thank you so much, Matthew, for the insights that you provided, for taking over hosting while I fell off the face of the internet. So if you have questions or you're looking for more in-depth support, definitely take a look at this link, gradcoach.me/QA. That'll allow you to book an initial consultation with one of our coaches, and they'll discuss where you need support and how they can support you in that space as well.